Ladies and gentlemen, what if the silence you feel inside is not the absence of God, but His deliberate invitation? What if the lack of drive you mourn is not a curse, but a hidden mercy? We are often deceived into thinking that our inner drive, our motivation, is the wellspring of all progress. When it burns brightly, we feel unstoppable, as though our willpower alone can move mountains. But when that flame dies down, we panic, assuming we've lost our purpose or that God has turned His face from us. In truth, what has been taken away is not purpose, but the illusion of self-sufficiency. God allows our motivation to fade, so that we might see what we could not otherwise, that we were leaning too heavily on ourselves. Enthusiasm masquerades as faith until it is tested in silence. When the excitement disappears, the question emerges: did we ever truly trust Him, or were we trusting our own energy? By removing the spark we so eagerly depended upon, God is gently teaching us that strength borrowed from fleeting emotions cannot sustain a lasting walk with Him. Left unchecked, our confidence in motivation leads to pride. We begin to believe that our own fire fuels our journey, but God does not wish for His children to be trapped by a fragile source of power that flickers with every mood or season. Instead, He dismantles our illusions so that we can finally discover the deeper reality, that our lives are upheld not by our enthusiasm, but by His steadfast presence. In this stripping away, God does not abandon us. He delivers us from the fragile scaffolding of self, grounding us in a strength that does not wither. When we speak of awakening, many imagine a surge of clarity, a rush of passion, or a sudden flood of motivation that carries them higher than ever before. Yet the reality is far different. True awakening is not a soft pillow, but a refining fire. God's awakening often begins by stripping away the very comforts we thought we could not live without. Instead of filling us with endless energy, He removes the supports that once carried us, forcing us to see that spiritual growth is not built on feelings, but on foundation. The fireworks we expected fade quickly, leaving us face to face with a quieter, harder truth. Awakening is less about delight and more about transformation. God is not interested in dazzling us for a moment. He is intent on shaping us for eternity. The first act of this shaping is subtraction. He removes the borrowed strength of excitement and exposes the fragile scaffolding of our dependency on emotions. What feels like emptiness is actually His careful work of cleansing. In the absence of outward fire, He invites us to discover the steady glow of His presence, a light not bound to mood or season. Just as gold must pass through heat to be purified, so the awakened soul must pass through the silence, where motivation dies and obedience is born. The gift is not always joy at first, but refinement. And from that refining process emerges a faith that is quieter, deeper, and far less likely to break. Motivation is a powerful feeling, but it is also fleeting. It arrives like a gust of wind, pushing us forward for a moment, then disappears without warning, leaving us stranded if we depended on it alone. Obedience, however, is not born of mood or impulse. It is an anchor, steady and immovable, no matter the weather of the soul. God allows motivation to fade so we may learn this difference. He is not cruel in withholding it, but wise in teaching us that the path of faith is not paved with constant enthusiasm. If we only act when we feel inspired, our devotion is shallow, but when we choose to act even when our hearts feel heavy, and our energy is gone, our obedience becomes a testimony of love, not of comfort. This is why the absence of motivation can be a gift. It forces us to ask ourselves, will I only follow when I feel like it, or will I follow because He is worthy, whether or not my emotions agree? The former is convenience, the latter is covenant. In this way, God uses our seasons of emptiness to grow us beyond the need for emotional fuel. He teaches us to walk steadily with Him, not by sparks of excitement, but by the steady flame of commitment. Motivation is pleasant, but it cannot be trusted to remain. Obedience, though it often feels harder, carries us farther because it is rooted not in self, but in the unchanging faithfulness of God. The wilderness is never comfortable, yet it has always been God's chosen classroom. When Israel wandered in the desert, it was not because He had abandoned them, but because He was preparing them. He stripped away the familiar comforts of Egypt so that His people could learn dependence on Him alone. There was no storehouse of food, no river of abundance, only daily bread falling from heaven. The desert exposed their need and reminded them that their survival was not in their own hands, but in His constant provision. In the same way, when we enter seasons where motivation disappears and the ground beneath us feels barren, it is not evidence of rejection, but of training. God uses the wilderness to silence the false securities we cling to. When the noise of excitement and drive fades, we discover whether we truly trust His word or simply the feeling of progress. In the emptiness, He teaches us patience. In the waiting, He deepens our endurance. The wilderness strips away illusions, so that what remains is faith-tested and proven. Though it feels dry, this place is fertile with hidden lessons. It is here that we learn to look up for manna, instead of looking inward for strength. The wilderness reminds us that faith does not grow strongest in seasons of abundance, but in scarcity, where God alone is enough. What feels like loss is often the very ground where trust takes root and matures into unshakable confidence in Him. Motivation is often mistaken for true desire, but the two are not the same. Motivation flares up like a match, bright, hot, and impressive for a moment, only to fizzle out when the air grows thin. True desire, the kind that endures, is not manufactured by human effort. It is planted by God Himself. When our motivation fades, it is not because we have failed, but because God is pulling us away from the shallow waters of self-generated passion and drawing us into the deeper current of His own desire for us. What He plants within the soul does not depend on moods, seasons, or circumstances. It may begin as a whisper, but it takes root, grows quietly, and withstands storms. This is why God often removes our temporary drive. He does not want us to rely on the fickle spark of excitement, but to hunger for something far more enduring. Our restless search for constant motivation can never sustain a lifelong walk of faith, but the holy desire He places within us cannot be extinguished. It is the kind of flame that does not go out when feelings fade, because it is not born of us. It is born of Him. In time, this planted desire transforms into a steady longing for His will, not just our own ambitions, and though it may not always feel dramatic, it endures when all else falters. What God sows in the soul, no draught of motivation can ever destroy. What feels like emptiness is often one of God's greatest mercies. When the fire of motivation dies out, we are quick to assume that something has gone terribly wrong, that we are broken, lazy, or forgotten. Yet this emptiness may be the very space God is carving out so He can fill us with something stronger. He does not remove our motivation to punish us, but to protect us from trusting in what cannot last. He knows that a life built on fluctuating emotions will eventually collapse. By allowing the well to run dry, He invites us to discover the deeper reservoir of endurance, discipline, and love that flows from Him alone. Seasons of emptiness are not signs of divine neglect. They are seasons of construction. God clears away what is shallow to make room for what is unshakable. Where motivation fades quickly, endurance endures. Where passion wavers, discipline holds firm. Where self-effort falters, His grace sustains. In this way, emptiness becomes a hidden blessing because it strips away every false foundation until only what is eternal remains. The absence of motivation teaches us that we were never meant to be carried by feelings, but by faith. So when you find yourself emptied of drive, do not despair. You are not being abandoned. You are being prepared. God's silence is not a void, but a workshop. He is crafting within you a strength that no season can take away, a love that does not depend on the rise and fall of emotion. So stop worrying. If God has emptied you, it is only because He intends to fill you with something better. Motivation is seasonal, but faith is eternal.